If you come into trading thinking you're smarter than the market, thinking that you're always right, thinking that you're the best, you're going to get humbled.
The two key contributing emotions in the market are fear and greed. And both of them are essentially stimulants for ego.
You're over leveraging, which is gambling, so you've got a problem. You're moving a stop loss, so that's gambling, that means you've got a problem.
How you combat those emotions is really what will determine your results in the long run.
Get your ego in check, realize you have one, and if you don't think you do, that's your ego talking to you.
Hello innovators, welcome back to another episode of our psychology series. Now in this episode, we're going to be talking about ego, traders' ego, and why there is absolutely no room for an ego in trading, and how there is no such thing as successful trading with an ego present.
Yeah, I think this subject has to be spoken about in detail. We might have touched on it a little bit through other videos, but I think we have to really, narrow down the subject of ego, because it is a huge problem for retail traders in the market. And until you master your ego, or even understand what ego is to begin with, because many might not even understand that ego is an issue at the beginning of their trading journey. But highlighting what ego is and understanding the problems it can cause and then how to combat that is very important. So I think doubling down on the ego situation and talking about it is very, very important and will help you with your trading.
Yeah, most definitely. I think the one thing I love about trading is it forces you to look deep within. So you may not necessarily know you have an ego until you start trading.
Yeah.
And it's one of them things where we kind of just go about life on a daily basis. Just the ego is normally taking control of many decisions and actions we do. And it's not until you actually make many mistakes in trading and lose a lot of money and kind of have that self-reflection that you realize you have an ego. And it's likely your ego that's contributing to a lot of your problems as well. So a lot of the times when people are losing money or continuously going on these losing streaks or blowing accounts, they don't ever process that it's actually the ego that's most likely controlling those decisions they make within the market.
Yeah. So, if you want to learn about yourself, we've said this many times, if you really want to learn about yourself, start trading, because it makes you have to look in the mirror and, really analyze yourself and the mistakes that you've made. And if you want to become a good trader, you really do have to sometimes take that long, hard look in the mirror. I'm sure many of us have been there at the beginning of our trading journey, and, study and understand yourself. And when you do that, you'll, as many of you probably have done, but some of you may be still in the situation where you're having problems with it. When you do that, you realize that it's your ego that's the problem. It's your ego that's driving you to make these stupid decisions that you make in the market. And, it's a lot like gamblers, a gambler mindset. And that's what happens in trading when you don't have the right trading plan, or, you don't have a clear-cut reason to execute a trade. And you're just trading, with no clear direction. And it brings in the ego, so that when you are on the wrong side of the market or the right side of the market, your ego has room to step in and take control and override your mind, that is there to make the correct decisions when you're cool, calm, and collective. But ego rushes in like a tidal wave and just literally takes over and tells you to double down when you're in a losing trade, or double up when you're in a winning trade. And it's such a powerful thing that it can just really overcome and overwhelm you. And we've all been there. And sometimes you think that ego is your friend. And the dangerous part about trading is sometimes you'll trade with ego and it will work out. And then that's probably the worst thing that can ever happen, because then you think that that feeling that you had is the correct feeling to go with. So then you do it again next time, and then you get completely blown out of the market. But yeah, it's just understanding what that ego is and that feeling that it brings, but having the right trading setup and the right strategy and the discipline to stick to that can keep ego at bay. But again, I think it's just understanding what ego is first, and then understanding how to combat that.
Yeah, you made a good point there actually, because trading can theoretically create an ego. as much as going into trading with an ego is dangerous, it can actually create an ego over time, specifically if it is going well. And you start to go down a winning streak, which is the biggest contributing factor to obtaining an ego in the markets, because there will very likely be periods in your trading where everything you touch turns to gold.
Yeah.
You just trade after trade is coming through perfectly. And it can really easily convince you that you have now mastered this and this is now fully in your control. And that's what a lot of people forget. A lot of people go into the markets, especially as newcomers, with this belief that, they are in control or the market can be mastered and the market owes them something and it can just be controlled in many ways. But that's not the reality, of course. And when you eventually get humbled, you have a choice to really make in that moment to, again, take fault or blame the market. An ego is present in many different moments when trading, but that is one of the key moments where ego comes in, because you have an opportunity when you suffer from these losses to look within and just go, that was my fault. I'm the cause of this problem. But most people can never accept that reality. So the ego then steps in and they blame the market. They blame manipulation. And realistically, when you think about blaming manipulation or something like that as well, they're cheap excuses because the markets are manipulated. That's the reality of it. And in fact, manipulated markets, I would argue, is one of the biggest benefits of trading.
Yeah, once you understand.
Yeah.
But yeah, with ego, ego, it's such a complicated thing to understand. But I think that no one can become a successful trader, especially like retail traders getting into the market. The sooner that you realize that you have an ego and that you need to remove it, that's the moment that you can be successful. That's why we want to talk about it in detail today. Like Tori just said, at the very beginning, when you're very new to the market, you just want to dabble in the market. You want to make a bit of money. It's all very light and, light-hearted. And then next thing you start trading with live funds, and then it gets very emotional. The ego comes in, and then it doesn't feel as light anymore. Trading starts to feel a bit heavy, and your fear comes in, all the psychology factors. But a lot of that is ego, and there'll be some of you watching this who are successful now or on the way to be successful. Some of you will not be successful yet. But I think the turning point in being successful is understanding that you do have an ego and you need to sort it out. I think some people say, how long does it take to learn to trade? And I always say that, the technicals you can pick up in a few months, 6 months or whatever, or a year maybe, but it's your understanding your psychology and being able to deal with yourself. That's the hard part. And, some people can be successful after, let's say, 12 months. Some people can take 5 years. But the reason of that time span and difference is dealing with your ego. Because, some people can identify, okay, I've got an issue. Let me stop having an ego. Let me leave that at the door. And some people are able to identify that and get over that hurdle a lot quicker than others. Others have a bigger ego, and some people will be at tug of war with their ego for years and years and years and keep trying to impose their thoughts or believe that they're right onto the market and making the stupid mistakes, not sticking to risk management, etc., etc. They will not be humbled by the market. They keep trying to fight an ever-losing battle with the market to try and prove that they're always correct or they're the smart one or they want that big trade. And it's just a spiraling situation. It just gets worse and worse and worse. And I said, many of you probably feel that. You might feel that you've been at tug of war with the markets for years and you just can't seem to get to the other side. But believe me, if you just, look in the mirror or just sit down and just really think about what it is that the issue is, and get a pen or a paper and write down, what's your biggest mistakes in trading, and many of the things we'll talk about today, but they can all be linked back to ego and, understanding it's your ego and that part of your mind that's making you make those mistakes. For example, like when you're in a loss and you have a stop loss, and then, you're starting to go into a bit of a loss, a bit of drawdown, price is getting close to your stop loss, you move that stop loss by 5 or 10 pips. Because ego won't let you lose. It's like you're hardwired to not lose as a human, or, that fear of losing. So your ego's going, like the devil on your shoulder going, move your stop loss by 5-10 pips, and then it gets closer to your where you've moved it, so you move it down another 5-10 pips, and your ego's going, you can't lose, move it more, and then things like that is your ego coming in. But if you can identify, like, you in trading, you cannot have an ego, and you may have heard before, leave your ego at the door. When you start trading, you have to leave your ego at the door. If you come into trading thinking you're smarter than the market, thinking that you're always right, thinking that you're the best, you're going to get humbled. And all of those things link to ego. And as you said, even when you're profitable and you're on a winning streak and you're flying high, you're thinking, this is easy, I'm just printing money now. That's your ego talking. You got to curb that. Sometimes at that point, you need to identify, okay, shit, my ego's entering and trying to take over. Let me step away and not trade tomorrow. Even though I'm on a winning streak, let me not trade tomorrow. Let me take a day back. Or sometimes if you're on a 2-3 week winning streak, take a week off. Because your ego, as much as even a veteran trader will be able to identify the ego, it's very hard to keep it at bay when you're on losing streaks, when you're on winning streaks. But it's being able to identify that your ego is coming in. And I fully believe that to become a successful trader, you just have to basically study yourself throughout the day. Constantly look at every decision you're about to make when you're trading. Just think, hold on, why am I making this? But just before you press buy or sell, just have a checklist. Is it ego? Is there a reason? Am I FOMOing into this, fear of missing out? Am I rushing this trade? Have a checklist just to make sure that the ego isn't coming in and making you take that trade. And the more you study yourself before taking trades, the more successful you'll be.
You've made another very good point there that I was actually going to start delving into as well, about moving stop losses.
Yeah.
And it's funny because the first time you actually experience being humbled by the market, or what actually removes your ego, is true. Every time you blow an account, or an account is blown, the main contributing factor is either over leveraging or moving your stop loss.
Yeah.
And when you're in that phase, and most of the time I would say people are not necessarily scared of losing money, they're scared of being wrong.
Yeah.
That's exactly the key difference with that. You don't even care because the ego's overriding even the concern of losing money at that point. You would rather be correct and consistently drag that stop loss so far away, but it becomes a blinding, almost a rabbit hole that you fall into. And we may have touched upon this before, but when you're in that situation where you've most likely over leveraged and you're moving your stop loss, where again, it's almost a chain reaction of events. If you make the initial ego driven move of over leveraging, which again is your ego. And to be honest, in this day and age of social media, a lot of people are probably over leveraging for the simple fact they want to show large profits on social media as well. And I think that plays a significant role because a lot of people want to show that they're, and this is why sometimes I'm happy to show myself even like a £500 profit or even £1,000, £2,000, £3,000 profit, because it's so far different to what you're shown should be a good profit for a day on social media. And sometimes I even stop myself and be like, is this good enough to show on social media? Are people going to laugh at me? But actually, no, it's a profit is a profit. And we forget that. But over leveraging is normally a byproduct of ego, because you want to not only do this for yourself, but you want to show other people a lot of the time as well. But it is a chain reaction, because once you do that, you're less inclined and the ego overrides you to then not want that stop loss hit either, because you almost can't stomach the loss. But then you don't want to lose. So you keep dragging that thing further. And when I say a rabbit hole, you get to a kind of point where you're so consumed by the ego at that point. And like Bernie said, it gets 5 pips away, you move it another 5 pips. And then you continuously do that. And you're so blinded and consumed by your ego, you're probably not even looking at your balance at this point. And you've gone so far into the depths of the Mariana Trench that only in that moment where you've been so blinded by the ego and you've moved that stop loss so far, you kind of, and I've done this before, where I've just dragged it so far out or just removed it altogether. I'm like, it's in the universe's hands now. But you almost drag yourself. And if you learn from this, it's very beneficial, because for that whole time, you think you're in control. You've made all these decisions believing you're correct and you're a big shot and you've done whatever. But then you hit a certain point of, if you continue doing that for too long, You then turn and suddenly you enter into this moment of, you may not even be religious, but you start praying to a God of some sorts that the market is going to return. And you end up being very, very humbled in that moment. And I found myself doing that before,
Yeah.
where I've been over leveraging, the stop loss has moved, and then I'm essentially a few pips away. And at that point, I'm on my hands and knees, like, please reverse. But the same is applicable to the upside in terms of taking profits as well, and even closing a trade. You simultaneously, ego can consume us to hold trades theoretically more than we need to do so. And it's very important during the trade management phase that there is no ego involved, because there could also be many signs from the market that we know are indicating there's a high likelihood of a reversal for the market to go against us in a more dangerous, especially if you've got like trades trading near your entry. But there are times where it's completely justifiable to take smaller profits if the market presents a dangerous sign. It could be a 0.25% profit or a 0.5% profit. But the ego will often override the risks of what we're physically seeing on the chart as well.
Yeah.
And we want to hold that golden goose of a trade to the moon. Same as crypto as well, in theory. You know, ego consumes us in that moment when the market's at all-time highs. We know that's historically a dangerous area to be holding for too long.
Yeah.
But many people don't take profits because they just want more and more and more.
More.
And it is...
And that's what ego definitely takes over. I think in crypto, it might even be worse than in Forex. But yeah, like in crypto, it's like so many people, it's like what's the saying? You should have took profit instead of taking a screenshot.
Yeah.
Because that's exactly what we're talking about. You know, the ego is to take a screenshot of your profit and post it on social media, rather than doing a sensible thing, which is to actually taking some profit and having some realized profit and making some real profit, rather than your money going back down to basically zero again. You know, it's all about your ego taking over at that time. And then when especially in crypto and the market's going up, nobody can see any down. But, you know, same thing in Forex as well, you know, that can happen. And what I find, you know, little things like an example of ego in trading is, you know, let's just say you're in a Forex trade and you're up £900, like your ego can be like, go for the 1,000, go for the 1,000, that round psychological level, like hold it. And as you said, you might be seeing, you know, on the charts, there's a reason to get out of this trade. But your mind and the greed and the ego can be like, no, go for more, try hold. And then you don't hit that target, and then price pulls back, and then you lose everything because your ego was trying to get you to just be that little bit more greedy. But, you know, with these, there's so many different parts where ego comes in. Obviously, we're talking about losing, we're talking about winning. There's so many little different scenarios in trading that is almost impossible to mention all of them, where your ego does step in. But, you know, it's very important to, you know, firstly, identify that ego is present, and then understand like how it's manipulating you. You know, one thing you just said is the markets are manipulated, but you're also almost being manipulated by your ego, and you've got to understand that. And as soon as you realize that, yeah, your decision making is basically being manipulated by this thing called an ego, and you've got to combat that as well as the manipulation in the market. But you've got to combat that, and then you can be a successful trader. But you really have to identify. I think if you know, it's very easy to make you know, any loss that you've had in the market, put it down to the market's fault. Again, that's ego. You know, blaming the market or blaming, I think you just touched on that earlier, you know, blaming the market or saying there was a reason that you lost that trade. A lot of people can't just say, okay, I lost. You know, my analysis was wrong, I lost. Some people be like, oh, I was trading too early, I was tired in the morning, or, you know, I was working and that's why I took the wrong trade. Or there's always some reason, but there's no like accountability. So it's people letting their ego take over and not having accountability for why they've lost. But if you push the ego aside and, you know, write down the reasons why you've lost all of those trades, then you'll be a better trader. But a lot of people are stuck, as I said, playing tug of war for years because they won't even admit to themselves why they've lost. And like we've said this before, you know, you don't lose in the market, you learn. But if you won't tell yourself, if your ego comes in and says, oh, I lost because I was too busy at work, so I couldn't keep an eye on the charts. Well, then how are you ever going to learn? You keep blaming, your ego keeps, because that's how the human brain works. You know, humans never want to be wrong. You always want to blame someone else, blame whoever gave you a trade, or blame the reason you took the trade, or because you were working, or because you were tired, or whatever the reason is. You always want to blame someone and not ever take accountability for it. But if you take if you understand that that is because of ego, and then take accountability, then you can learn from each trade. And then instead of taking 5 years playing tug of war with the market, you know, you can be that person that learns in a year. But it's, again, identifying that your ego, and just, you know, identifying that you do have an ego. Everyone has an ego. Like when I first started trading, you gave examples. I had the same examples. You know, I was young, just wanted to dabble in the markets. Like I said earlier, it was all very light. You know, placing £1 a pip on a trade and winning. The next thing, 6 months in, you know, things get dark. You know, things get dark. You're having losses. You're pulling your hair out. You're blowing accounts, and you know, I didn't think I had an ego. I didn't even think ego would come into this whole world. I just wanted to trade and make a bit of money because everyone else said it was easy on social media. But then I realized I had an ego, and it was the quicker I identified that I had an ego. Some people might even say you've got a problem. You know, if you think about, and that's probably a good way to say it, like you've got a problem. If you're still making these mistakes, you've got a problem. And what I'll, you know, compare it to is gambling. You know, when gamblers keep gambling, they have a problem. But why are they continuing to gamble? Because their ego is taken over. They think that they can beat the system. So like, I don't think like in America you have this as much, but for example, in the UK, you have betting shops where you can bet on horse racing or dog racing or roulette, you know, things like that. Obviously in America you have casinos and stuff like that. But you know, in the UK, we see people in there morning, noon, and night, like in there for years of their life. If you live in an area, you see the same people in there, and you're like, you're not winning, but you've got a problem. And you're like, you've got a problem. Like we all know, you see that person, you're like, that. Unfortunately, it's sad to see that, but that person's got a problem. They've got a gambling addiction. They've got a problem. But the problem is their ego has consumed them, and it's completely taken them over. And so now their ego is like, you can make this money back. You can make one big trade, one big bet. You can make your money back. You can come back. But they spend not 1 year or 5 years. They can sometimes into the abyss. They're there for the rest of their lives, just basically playing tug of war with their ego, trying to make their money back. But that's the same thing with trading. You know, do you want to be that person who has years and years and years of just gambling, throwing money at the market and losing because you've got a problem? And that problem is your ego. You've got to identify, shit, I've got a problem. And it takes a big person to be able to say, I've got a problem. I've got not so much of an addiction, but say I've got an ego issue. And like, I had that problem because obviously at the very beginning, you do make those mistakes. You're basically gambling. You're over leveraging, which is gambling. So you've got a problem. You're moving a stop loss. So that's gambling. That means you've got a problem. All the other issues that you do at the beginning is basically gambling. So you've got a problem. When you realize, shit, I've got a problem here. I need to stop this. And Richard, stories I've said in previous videos is when I had my biggest loss. That was the slap in the face moment for me. It made me realize, shit, I've got a problem here. And then the only way to make this work is to stop gambling and to leave ego at the door and trade correctly, which is with a plan, with a strategy, and stick to risk management. But it takes, you know, for some people, well, for me, it took a big loss to be able to admit I had a problem. And for others, it might take a big loss, a big loss as well. But, you know, we're here to make you not have that big loss. That's why we're telling you these stories of our experiences 15 years ago for me, and a long time, 10 years ago, or whatever more for you, to try and make you not have to have that dark moment of having a big loss. And, you know, we're almost doing this video to make you identify that you may have an issue and a problem, but it takes a big thing for a man or a woman to be able to hold your hands up and say, all right, I have a problem here, because that is defeating your ego. If you can admit that you've got a problem, that is the first step to defeating your ego. And when we started talking about ego in today's podcast, I didn't think it was going to go down this path
No.
to talking about
It makes sense.
potentially having a gambling
Yeah.
addiction. But if you do think about it, it is very similar.
But also gamblers are very similar as well in that they don't blame themselves for their losses or for being in there 24/7. Speak to any gambler, they'll blame the machines, they'll blame the odds.
Yeah.
They'll say the horse race has been fixed.
Yeah.
There is always every
yeah.
excuse under the
Exactly
sun,
well said,
but
yeah.
the odds are not in their favor. And that is the same as trading. The odds are not in your favor at all. But there is still a probability to win. One of the ways to put the odds in your favor is to actually remove the ego, because the ego is actually one of the largest contributing factors to the odds not being in your favor. The markets really and truly, and also something to mention, when a lot of people blame the markets for their losses, there are thousands of other traders, successful traders, profiting off the moves that have caught you out. So when someone says, oh, that was manipulation, well, there's another trader out there that's made money from that move without insider information or anything along those lines. So every move in the market is predictable to someone. And just because that move has stopped you out or blown your account, it doesn't mean it was malicious in any way. You just haven't understood that move. So you must also think about it from that perspective. If someone else has lost, or if I have lost and someone else has won off this trade, what do they know that I don't? And instead of pointing the finger and blaming the markets or saying it's all rigged against you, which quite frankly it is anyway, you need to look elsewhere and go, well, actually, there are others out there that clearly are doing something right. And one of the easiest answers to look at immediately is they don't have an ego. And if they did have an ego, they probably would have been caught in the same move as you as well. You know, the markets are really intended to manipulate emotions and then make you act off those emotions. But once you've acted off those emotions, the ego will come into control, because the two key contributing emotions in the market are fear and greed. And both of them are essentially stimulants for ego. They go both ways. If you get too greedy, that's ego. If you get too fearful, you don't want to admit fear. So instead, the ego steps in instead and tries to mask that fear by doing other things. It's kind of a double-edged sword, really, isn't it? Ego goes into so many things. Like one thing I used to do a lot that really used to mess me up was, again, having a really good trade. Let's say a really good Forex trade or a really good crypto trade. But the ego wouldn't allow me to just accept that trade. I would start scaling in. I would start adding more positions. It would go up a bit, pull back. And instead of just simply taking a singular swing trade, maybe going for a modest 50 pips, in the space of entry to where that 50 pips is targeted, next round I've got 7 positions running on every single move. And a singular pullback. Kaboom. Hasta la vista. And that's ego, isn't it?
Yeah,
what else is it?
There's a couple of things I want to talk about that you've mentioned that I think are really interesting. Just going back to what you said a minute ago about, you know, just because you blame somebody else or you blame the market, someone else has profited off that trade. Now, most of you know, like originally it was called sniper. All my trades are sniper entries. And I don't like it if my trade isn't a sniper entry. I feel a bit of a failure because I'm very specific. But you guys will know me as a sniper. But going back, this is actually tying into what I was saying. Back when I was losing, and you know, I could have my biggest loss and realize, okay, I've got an issue here. At that point, when I was sticking to my risk reward, sticking to my trade and everything. Obviously, it wasn't like an overnight success. I was still losing some trades. But it was at that point that, like, when I was getting stopped out of trade, this is very, very important. I think if you listen to what I'm trying to explain here, it's very, very good. So I had the issue with my ego. And then once I put my ego aside, I started trading correctly all the time. I used to do it for a certain period, ego would get in the way, I'd over leverage, lose, etc., etc. But then once I managed to overcome my ego and started trading correctly, it wasn't like overnight success. I was still losing some trades, like getting stopped out by a few pips here and there. But as I had parked up the ego, closed the door on it, I then started to dissect my losing trades, because before that I'd lose and I'd always blame. My ego would come in and I'd always blame some other reasons. Like I would be at work, I'd blame because I was at work. If I was behind a desk, these things wouldn't happen. I used to always have all the excuses that most of you probably have had. But then when I put my ego aside and then started trading, So I'd have like maybe 50% winners, 50% losers, but I started studying my losing trades. And that moment is where I became a sniper, because instead of making excuses for my losing trades, I started looking into my losing trade. Before, I'd just brush them under the carpet, move on to the next trade. That was my ego. But then when I started dissecting my losing trades, I was thinking, why do I keep getting stopped out by a few pips? Why does it like hit my stop loss? And then the ego would almost try and come back in and say, well, if you had moved your stop loss, that wouldn't have happened. But then I was like, no, I get stopped out by a few pips. And your ego would be like, well, if you just moved your stop loss, you wouldn't have happened. That wouldn't have happened this time. But I was like, no, I'm not letting the ego come back in. And then so I dissect the losing trades. And then I learned about manipulation. That's where I learned about manipulation, because I realized that I was getting manipulated. But before, I was just losing a trade, moving on to the next one, losing a trade, moving on to the next one. Didn't want to have any accountability and just wanted to move on to the next trade, because we don't want to feel like losers. We want to forget about it as quick as possible. But then I started dissecting the trades, the losing trades. And then I started realizing, hold on, there's a pattern here why I keep losing. There's a reason why I keep losing. So then I started to adjust my trade, and I started to move, like enter higher up, stop losses higher, knowing what was going to happen in the market, because I noticed what the market kept doing. Bang, started becoming a sniper, started understanding manipulation. And that all came from putting my ego aside and actually, taking accountability for my losses, studying each loss, dissecting it, thinking, why did I lose? I didn't lose for no reason. There's something going on here. Let me figure out what that is. And then I started looking deeper and deeper and deeper. And then next thing, I was getting sniper entry, figured it out. And I never would have done that if I kept my ego, if I kept saying, oh, I'm good, like, don't worry about the losses. That's because I was tired that day, or I was working this day. Or if I kept doing that, I'd still be in the same position 15 years later. I'd still be blowing accounts. I'd still be, having big losses, still having win streaks, but then blowing it with one losing trade and stuff. And so it was very interesting, like from what you said I'm trying to explain, the moment you identify that you do have an ego and put that to the side, and then start, taking accountability for your losses, then that's when you can become successful, because you can become a better trader instead of just blaming the markets or blaming something else. And then, sorry to keep talking, but then when you mentioned about where you keep putting the 7 or 8 scaling into a trade, I think that's also because, the ego, when you're looking at the charts too much, and it goes up into profit, it comes back down. And then you might not even be back at break even, but you're trying to force the market to go back up. And you think that your 1 lot or 10 lots or even 100 lots is going to affect the market and help that move. And you're trying to make it go in a certain direction. Your ego's taken over as well. But that can often happen when you look at the markets too much, where you're looking at your MT4 going up or down. Whereas if you just take a trade and step away and don't look at it, then your ego doesn't get the chance to take over, because you're not looking at the charts. The problem is a lot of people stare at the charts too much, like looking at the MT4 on their phone or sitting in front of a computer all day and watching every 15-minute candle moving up and down. And then that's triggering the ego to step in, and if it goes into drawdown, think, fuck this, I was in profit, let me add another lot, because that's you think your ego is making your brain think that somehow by you adding another lot is going to make a change to the market.
It's true. That's what makes trading so dangerous, because if you lose, the ego doesn't want you to have a losing day. So then you'll take more trades out of revenge and being driven by the ego that normally contributes to more losses. But if you have a winning day, the ego also tells you it's not enough, or it says, the going's getting good, go again.
Keep going.
Another one, just another one. But I've had that so many times with I'll be watching the market on an intraday basis when a trade gets set off. And I start to almost tell myself that I can predict almost every single 1 minute candle. And the confidence of having the initial trade go into profit would lead me to believe I could then predict the next sequence of how the 1 minute would almost fulfill a 4-hour candle. And I would try and map out the steps and just buy on every single little retracement and try and continue the trend upwards. The ego also allows you to almost believe that things are easy, when the going is getting good as well. It's very dangerous because the moment you try to trick yourself into believing trading is easy, the market will show you just how fucking difficult it actually is. And that is the craziest part of all of this. It's just, it is down to you, really, mentally. What you think, what you feel, and how you combat those emotions is really what will determine your results in the long run. Your strategy is theoretically irrelevant. It's meaningless in the grand scheme of things because if the ego is consuming you, you may have a 70% probability setup. And a lot of people have this issue, I would say, where they may get winning trades and they actually are theoretically on a strategic side. They have the formula and strategy that is profitable, but they completely fuck it up themselves by touching things or moving things or, you know, all of these things we do in between the trade as well. We may add another position. We may do some, I don't know, there's so many things you can physically do to damage a trade, but it's like a lot of the time people get good entries, they get the profits, but they hold on too long or they add more positions. They just, we ruin it for ourselves. That's the issue.
We are
Every
trader are their own biggest enemy.
Yeah.
It's not really you against the market, it's you against you. And we've said that in so many videos on the psychology series and why we're doing these psychology series to try and help. But it's like you said, you know, your strategy is immaterial really to your trading at times because your strategy is only 20%. You know, we've said so many times in this series, psychology is 80, you know, I'd argue maybe 90, 95% of trading. Your strategy is very minimal because it's all about psychology. And in that psychology bracket, if you say 80%, how much would you say is ego?
Most of it.
50% of it or something? You know,
Easily.
it takes over. It's a huge part of the psychology is your ego. That's why I thought we'd talk about ego today because, out of that 80%, strategy 20%, psychology 80%, you know, you could say 50, 60% of that psychology is your ego taking over. And if you can master your ego, then you've basically mastered your psychology. And if you've mastered your psychology, without a shadow of a doubt, you'll be a successful trader. Because most people have a winning strategy. They just can't execute it because of their psychology and because of their ego. As we've said, there's so many different trading styles. At the very beginning, I used to think that my trading style was the only trading style out there. And it had to be that trading style or no trading style. But, you know, you mature as a trader, you realize that there's hundreds of thousands of different trading strategies. Everyone has different strategies. There's millions of traders, millions of strategies. Everyone has their own strategy that works for them, especially because most strategies are custom to each person because everybody has a different level of risk, a different risk appetite. But so every strategy is slightly different. But most people have a winning strategy in their possession. They know how to trade the markets. They just cannot control themselves or their ego. And so, if you can get your ego in check, realize you have one, because don't think you don't, you do. And if you don't think you do, that's your ego talking to you. So, do you know what I mean? So if you don't think you have an ego, then that's the problem. So you need to fix that. And as soon as you take that reality check that your ego is taking over 95% of your trading decisions, if you can identify that and leave it at the door, you'll be a very successful trader very, very quickly.
Yeah, that's a very fascinating part, actually, and a very fascinating aspect of being successful traders. A successful trader could have a completely contrarian strategy to another successful trader. It's not the strategy that makes those individuals successful. There will be someone using 15 moving averages with the RSI, completely crazy colored charts, grids, maybe an additional 10 indicators. But for that individual, that may be somehow they figured it out.
That works.
It works for them. And I used to be like that. I used to be like, bruv, this guy's got 15 indicators, but it's working. You can't be judgmental of people in that way.
Because your ego is making you be judgmental.
Exactly, because it's almost that superiority. And this is something I fucking hate in trading, is people believing that they have this superior strategy or the secret key, the holy grail, all of this stuff that is used for marketing. I think a lot of people have woken up now that there is no holy grail. I think we've hopefully bypassed that stage in life.
I don't know,
No?
I feel like I used to think that that maybe not, but social media, I think there's a lot of people that come into trading that get sort of
Yeah.
hypnotized by all of this fake
The secret
guru
go-to.
stuff.
Yeah, I guess that's, to be fair, social media has probably made it worse.
Yeah.
But putting that aside, which is, it's actually a good point. Yeah, probably is still something that gets
There's
used
a lot
quite a
out
lot.
there,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
I would hope most people would have matured by now to have seen past that. But in a way, you kind of have to go through it to learn.
Yeah, I think
as well.
so.
It's like a lot of people that end up getting scammed or they fall for the get-rich-quick schemes. I guess if you've never experienced it before and then someone presents a holy grail, human psychology, and also ego, to even fall for that stuff, it is our ego in the offset because you want to skip the process, you want to take shortcuts, and you want to go straight to the holy grail because your ego tells you this is easy. Or I think that's what taps into it as well. Ego, when you tell someone I've got the holy grail or I've got the secret, people want to buy into that because it's like the ego wants them to be the holder of that key and the holder of the secret as well. But I think in terms of successful traders, the one thing that will always be different between every successful trader is the strategy. But the one thing that I can absolutely assure you will be alike is the control of the emotions and the control of the ego. That's the one characteristic of every single successful trader. You physically cannot succeed. And going back to what you kind of said about emotions being 80%, I almost view, if you were to view like one small brain and then a larger brain, which is emotions, ego is almost the switch that's attached to the emotions, the 80%.
Yeah.
So the emotions are already the strongest factor, but there's a switch next to it, which is the ego on and off. And if you switch it on like a light bulb, it will essentially ignite all of the additional and the rest of the emotions into the picture as well, if that makes sense. I'm trying to visualize it like somehow, like I always do.
I can get your
Yeah,
vision.
it's like there's an ego switch right there, and if you just push it, everything else inside explodes.
The little brain, the big brain.
Exactly, 20%, 80%. It's crazy, really, that something so seemingly irrelevant can impact your trading. But I also think this is why trading is so hard for so many people, because you never look within. You never blame yourself. No. You don't ever realize that something you're never really taught throughout life to even consider or really keep in check anyway is likely the largest contributing factor to your downfall. You're always looking at your strategy because with trading, it comes down to, I see this, I trade off this basis, or, entry, stop loss, take profit. People think it's that. But everything that goes on internally is the driving force behind those decisions that you are making within the market. And that's probably what's so confusing to so many people, because you don't even consider to look within in those circumstances. You don't think it's ego. You have to, like you said, you have to really lose a lot of money or do something fucking stupid, which unfortunately is the reality. Yeah. And the moment you take fault for that and you start to go, what did I do wrong? Not what did the market do wrong, but what did I do wrong? And you made another good point. No one goes back and checks their previous trades.
No.
People lose, brush it off and just go, let's go on to the next one. We move straight onto the next one. And everyone's always looking at the present candlesticks and the future candlesticks. But no one ever goes back and retraces their steps and goes back to the historical data where their decisions are made. There's actually no greater educator than going back and looking at previous trades, because every mistake you've ever made is right there in the fine print. Yeah. It's there in your trading journal. It's there in your trade log. Like, you can see every single area you have lost and you have won.
It's the best teaching you can get. And like second what I said earlier, is the best teaching you can get. So you've lost money in the market, don't let it go to waste. Let it be a good lesson. Take accountability and look at that losing trade.
Yeah,
because that was a turning point for me.
And you see it a lot in sports, like in Formula One. If someone crashes or a tire implodes, or they don't just go, oh fucking hell, Lewis Hamilton's tire blew up. They retrace and go back, and there's investigations. Why that happened. Yeah, good. Football, there's investigations into whether that was a penalty or not. Like, no one just goes, he missed.
Yeah.
There are full-blown investigations, and you need to initiate those investigations on your own results, win or a loss. Don't just brush it off and be like, oh well.
Yeah, even the winners as well.
Yeah, the winners.
Like the winners, if you've taken a trade and let's just say you've hit 4% profit, but then you look back, I'm sure we've all done this, You know, sometimes you look back at that trade a week later, you're like, oh, fucking hell. If
Yeah.
I'd held that, I would have made 20%. All right, well, go to the replay tool, take accountability first.
Yeah.
Keyword is always accountability. Take the replay tool, go back to that point and understand why did you take profit. Like if that was your target, fine. But if you were just, just going with it and just taking profit for whatever reason at the time, figure out what it was that you took profit for and why didn't you hold it? Why are you complaining now? Why is your ego coming in and saying, oh, if I held it this long, I would have made this much? Well, why did you? Go back and find out. Take accountability. Don't say, oh, if this happened, I would have done this. What's the saying? If my aunt had balls, she'd be my uncle. if there's no point saying if. Go back and do the hard work. Take accountability. Go back to replay tool and find out why you took profit. Don't just say, oh, if I done this or if I done that. Have some accountability, but without being too much of a life guru. I think the key word is accountability, because not just, as you said, you gave a few other examples, but not just in trading, but really anything in life. If you don't take accountability for your actions, it's very hard to become a better person in anything you do, whether it's your job at work, whether it's your relationship with your girlfriend or boyfriend, whether it's, anything that you do in life. If you make a mistake, if you can't take accountability for it, you can't grow, you can't push on, you can't become better. And bringing it back to trading is very much the same. It's about accountability. And accountability only comes if you can leave your ego at the door. There's no way to take accountability if you've got ego.
You have to be very honest with oneself, so to speak.
It does make you very... It's a strange thing, trading, isn't it? As I said, when you first begin, you never understand that you're going to embark on this journey to really understand yourself. Like, I was a young 21, 22-year-old when I started trading, and I didn't know as much about myself as trading showed me. Trading is like holding up a mirror to you and just showing you who you are. And it's fine to have flaws. It's fine to have an ego. It's fine to have all these issues at the start. But trading is more or less just about, the quicker you understand your flaws, there's nothing wrong with having them, because everybody has them. That's what I'm trying to say. Everyone has an ego, but you just got to learn to control it. And basically, when you start trading, it's like the market holding a mirror in front of you each day and just, just seeing how you react on a daily basis. And then the sooner you just identify it and then learn how to handle it, that's how you become a successful trader.
But that's the thing, because of ego, we don't want to accept we have problems. But
you don't want to look in the mirror.
You don't want to look in the mirror. We are a problematic species. And especially with the markets are not a mechanism that suits well for emotions. And it's very likely intentionally moving in that way and manipulated in that way, because we just never want to accept there's something wrong with us. Again, go and tell a gambling addict they have an addiction, or an alcoholic, they would say, no, I haven't.
No, they haven't. No.
There's always an excuse. There's always a reason. There's always something to mask the reality, because they just don't want to look within. Because if they did look within,
they're going to hate it.
Yeah. It's like when I gained a lot of weight for a long time, I was like, I'm not fat. I wouldn't look in the mirror enough to almost know that I'm fat.
Yeah.
Because I didn't want to... I had this ego, essentially, where I refused to admit I was fat. And for as long as I avoided the mirror, I wasn't fat.
Yeah.
Anyone could call me fat, but I wasn't, to me.
It's like when I said about counting calories.
Yeah, I was like,
I know how to count calories. You can't tell me about calories.
I was like, I know what to do.
I was like, okay, are you sure? It's a right big one.
But that's me putting my ego aside and saying that is the reality of the situation.
And then how great was life when you done that?
And life's been great ever since, because I put the ego to the side.
That's a great real life example.
And I never have shame in saying that stuff, because
and I think, just the reality fact that you were able to say it shows that you haven't got an ego. Just the fact to say it on camera and say that, just shows that you can leave ego at the door.
Yeah, and I think it's just, all of this is like a very good example of human nature.
Yeah.
We have like a defense mechanism that we will always use to safeguard us from ourselves most of the time as well, and from others. We just don't like to be wrong. We don't like to accept that we are the fault or cause of any downfall within our lives. And that's what really makes trading so difficult.
It's like almost, being wrong almost makes you feel like embarrassed.
Inferior.
Yeah, and like even what you just covered, like some people be embarrassed to say things like that, but when you mature and handle your ego, these things don't matter to you. Do you know what I mean?
No, you just stop caring. And
yeah.
that's a big important part of trading as well.
Yeah.
It's not caring.
Yeah.
Not caring at all. But it's also very important to stick to a trading plan, because if you go into trading with the correct risk management, you risk within a certain threshold that is acceptable to you. Your goal is to essentially minimize emotions and ego as much as possible. And it's only when you really deviate from what you should be doing that you then allow those emotions and ego to step in.
Yeah.
So if you know you can only afford to risk £100 a trade, why the fuck are you risking £1,000 a trade? The minute you do that, you're opening the doors for that automatic defense mechanism to kick in. Yeah, you flick the switch and then everything else inside activates. We literally do it all to ourselves, and there's so many different examples you can come from.
Be here all day talking about, as I said, there's thousands of different examples. You could literally spend a whole day talking about all the different scenarios. But it's just, I think that is actually a good point for a successful trader. Watching this video, and the reason we're doing these videos is so you don't have that big loss and have to go through that. So if you can watch this video and, get a notepad, and when you're trading, put ego at the top. And if you can identify every time you take a loss, as I said, it's not going to be an overnight success. Mm-hmm. But from this point in this video, if you have a notepad next to your trading desk, or whenever you take a trade, have ego written at the top, and then like every time you make a mistake and can contribute to ego, and then eventually just start making those mistakes less and less and less, then you'll be successful. And I said, you can be here for a long time talking about all of them, but I think being a successful trader is over the course of 6 months or a year, because it's not going to be an overnight success. But every time you make one of those mistakes that you could be here all day talking about, because there's so many, over the course of the next few weeks, months, 6 months, year, every time you do one, identify it and write it down and realize that happened, and then combat that by obviously not doing it anymore. But there's so many that will come up over the course of the next few months or even year of your trading. But it's just being able to identify that and then striking that off the list, and not making that mistake again. Making the same mistake continuously is insanity. Yeah. So if you're going around making the same mistakes continuously, it's just insane. So identify the hundreds of different issues that ego can cause, because it's going to happen to you again from the point in this video. There's no way to stop it 100%. But every time it happens, identify it, take accountability, and then don't do it again. And then slowly but surely, you'll leave ego at the door and be a successful trader.
Yeah, and just to finish up, that's a really good point, to almost use that as an exercise moving forward, writing ego down and asking yourself before any decision you make in the market, simply ask yourself, is this an ego-based decision? Whether that's over trading, whether you're about to move your stop loss, whether you're about to add more positions, or whatever it's going to be. Ask yourself before you execute. Don't leave it to fate, or leave it to the point where you have to have the wake-up call from a very negative or bad situation. Try and counter this before placing a trade within the market, because even the analysis could be ego-based in many ways. And again, that can go on forever. But the one thing I would say from my side is to take on board everything we say in these psychology series videos. We use many examples for a reason, and that's because we want it to be as relatable as possible with our own real life experiences. Because whilst you may not fully absorb everything in one go, subconsciously you're going to be absorbing this, and you may not realize it, but just a singular story we've given or a singular point we've made could just click at that right moment. And that's really why we do these videos, because in the heat of that moment where you are experiencing something, we really hope that you remember something you have seen, heard within these videos, because we guarantee you we've been through it all. We've done it all. Every up and down, we've been through it. So you should be using this to your advantage, and also using this as a reminder, as Bernie said, a really great point, take notes on what you've seen in this video, key points that have been made, write that down. And there's no better way to really have it absorbed than leaving it in front of you. The same place you are looking at the charts, put it in the same peripheral vision. That's the easiest way to do it, because if you put it too far away, you're going to miss it. Keep it in front of you, get a little notepad like those sticky pads, I would say, and slap it on your monitor. Do not do this, do not do that. Ego. Honestly, it will make the world of a difference. It won't be an overnight result and it won't be an overnight success. But over time, as you learn to combat a lot of the issues that are causing you losses, destruction, whatever it may be, once you can combat those, life will be much smoother from that point onwards.
Yeah, completely agree. And I said, it's just all about accountability, and just from this day forward, we've said experiences that we've had, we are trying to be relatable. We do these videos to help you and stop you from making big mistakes, and to shorten your journey to being a successful trader, profitable trader, very, very quick, and not have to go through all the mistakes that we made. But yeah, accountability and ego is the key word. Have right ego above your trading screen if you have to, with a question mark, and to see every day, are you taking a trade because of ego? Put a mirror above your trading screen if you have to look at yourself in the mirror every time you take a trade. Another good thing you can do is record, because now you can record your trading screen. When you're trading, record your screen, and then you can then, at the end of the day, you can go back and look at the bits where you took the trade and look and say, well, why did you do that? Did you enter on it because of FOMO? You can go back and look at why you made those decisions. But again, without accountability, most people might record their screen, have a few losing trades, and decide to delete it and not go and look back, because ego doesn't want you to go back and look at your mistakes. But have accountability. Have these little things. Might seem strange. Someone might walk in and see a mirror above your screen and think that you're a bit of a weirdo. But if it makes you become a successful trader 2 years quicker, then it's all worth it.
Your new life begins the moment you eradicate the ego. I'll leave you with that.
Thank you very much, and we hope that has helped you today, and we'll see you on the next series soon.
See you guys in the next one. Ciao, ciao.
Thank you, guys.